here, Kristen Murphy. We will be tonight's moderators. I work here at the college as the Assistant Director of Residence Life, but most importantly, while I'm standing here today, I also advise the Student Affairs Board, who is actually putting on this event, along with Tau Kappa Epsilon, who's actually doing some of the ushering and the voter registration in the front. So tonight I'm asking audience, we're going to introduce the candidates this evening, and when they come on stage, we certainly would welcome you to clap and cheer and that sort of thing, but as we're asking questions and that sort of stuff, as this conversation goes on, to please refrain from clapping and that type of thing, because that way we can get to questions a little more. And also, please note that, and you can certainly clap at the end of the actual event as well. So the format of tonight's debate is sort of a question and answer. So what will happen is Kristen and I will ask one candidate to ask a question, and then from there, what we'll do is each candidate will then get a chance to answer that question, okay? We will also be accepting, and hence why they're handing out some pieces of slips of paper, audience questions as well. We won't get to all of them. I have been told by some of the candidates they will be sticking around for a little while afterwards, so if your question wasn't asked, I'm certainly would be more than happy to answer if they have time at the end of this event as well, okay? We will have timekeepers up front, and from there, I will turn this over to Kristen.
I will now like to introduce Dr. Jonathan Slater, the Director of the Institute for Ethics in Public Life, to give us some opening remarks.
Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Slater, and I am Director of the Institute for Ethics in Public Life at SUNY Plattsburgh. Dear students, faculty, members of the administration, and community members, on behalf of SUNY Plattsburgh, welcome. At the core of American democracy is the concept of freely given consent of the governed, we the people, to abide by the laws governing us. We do so willingly, without coercion, as responsible citizens allowed to exercise self-determination and freedom of speech without fear of interference. Aristotle, for example, believed democracy meant that a citizen standing at the center of a city could, while delivering an oration, be heard by all the city's people. Now, it's important to remember that in Aristotle's time, there was no public address system. Benjamin Franklin actually tested Aristotle's idea. Franklin conducted an experiment during an oration in downtown Philadelphia to determine just how many people could hear and understand the words of an orator without public address system, obviously. Anybody want to guess how many? 30,000, Franklin concluded. Wow. What Aristotle implied by his assertion, and what Franklin substantiated, was that human communication and the political process are inextricably linked. Politics, wrote Hannah Arendt in The Promise of Politics, is an absolute necessity for human life, not only for the life of society, but for the individual as well. The goal of politics, she wrote, is to safeguard life in the broadest sense. This evening, here in this room, we again are establishing that fundamental connection among communication, politics, public life, and democracy. Candidates will debate. We shall listen and pose questions. And in the end, we will head to the voting booth better informed than before, ready to act from knowledge rather than from ignorance. Of course, political knowledge and civic engagement go hand in hand. The students who have planned and organized this event understand that essential notion. Civic engagement becomes civic learning. Such deliberative practices as political debates demonstrate the ways we in America, and here at SUNY Plattsburgh, value democracy. The mission of a liberal education is to educate for democracy, says Lynn Pascarella, President of the Association of American Colleges and Universities. Students need the means to understand politics and the ways politics affects them. They must be offered opportunities to develop civic consciousness. Politics is not a spectator sport. For our students, interested issues can become political engagement. Engagement turns into advocacy. Advocacy can transform into activism. And perhaps our students can then change the world. Congratulations to our students for organizing this event. Bravo. And best of luck to our congressional candidates. Thank you.
So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our candidates tonight. Mr. Don Boyajian, Dr. Lynn Kahn, Ms. Emily Marks, Mr. Patrick Nelson, Mr. Dylan Radigan, and Ms. Katie Wilson.
Tonight's questions will be broken up into various categories, and the first category is education. The first question, we will start with Don, and the question is, do you believe education is a fundamental right? Why or why not? And each candidate has 30 seconds.
Are we doing the introductions? Introductions.
Oh,
Sorry.
I can go right
Each candidate has the introduction first, so we'll start there.
sorry.
Am I going?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you everybody for coming tonight. This is wonderful. I wish we could have class outside. It's so nice out today. I'm Don Boyajian. I live in Cambridge in Washington County. I'm an environmental attorney, and I think about my family's story as the reason for running. You know, my family came to the United States at the turn of the 20th century as refugees during the Armenian genocide, and we found the American dream right in upstate New York. And I just don't think that's possible anymore. And what's worse than that is this current administration in Congress is really attacking the very fundamental protections which afforded my family the ability to get to the middle class. They're attacking healthcare, they're attacking Social Security, they're attacking Medicare. Well, I'm running for Congress to protect those things, to get to universal health care, to address the student loan crisis, which is crippling a whole generation, all my friends and myself, in student debt. And I believe that I'm the best qualified to do this because I'm the only person in this field that actually worked in Congress. And during a very good, productive Congress that was committed to the middle class during the Obama administration. And somebody right now that's representing our towns and communities across upstate New York as a town attorney. We need somebody that's going to get results and stand up against this radical agenda in Congress and the presidential administration. And that's what I'd like to do for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. They call me the government mechanic. I am Dr. Lynn Kahn. I am the Green Party candidate for Congress for New York District 21. I want to thank the organizers of this event for including a third-party candidate, because usually we get left out. My degree is in clinical psychology. My area of expertise is group dynamics. But instead of doing family therapy or group therapy, I went into government agencies to fix our broken government. And I realized, after working inside government for just a few years, that the problem was bigger than a dysfunctional team. The culture of almost all of our federal departments and agencies is horribly broken. In the 1990s, I worked for 6.5 years on the Lighthouse Partnership to Reinvent Government, where we did work with Congress and wrote some legislation. In 2000, I helped the 7 different government agencies that fly in our national airspace system come together for a strategic plan, and that's where I learned about the power of dialogue and the power of partnership and the power of putting things down in writing to bring people together. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily.
Thank you very much. I'm Emily Martz, and I'm running for Congress to bring to Washington those values that we all here share, that are sorely missing in Washington. One is that all people matter. And we all deserve the chance to realize our full potential, regardless of the conditions we're born into or what we look like. It's a basic American right. And finally, a 40-hour work week should be rewarded. And from these values come my visions, and chief among them are that 10, 20 years from now, more graduating seniors can stay or leave, depending on where they want to live, not whether or not they can find a job here in the North Country. And I have the skills to help make this a reality. My 20-year business career culminated right before I was running, working for a leading economic development organization that helped small businesses expand, create new ones in this district. Down in Queensbury, Apex Solar, we did a public-private partnership 5 years ago. There were 30 people employed. There are now 120. So I have the experience to create these sorts of partnerships, to work with local businesses, to get us where we need to go in the North Country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for coming out to participate in the very important process of choosing our representatives in Washington, D.C. My name is Patrick Nelson, and I'm from Stillwater, New York, here in the 21st Congressional District. And I am running for Congress because we have some tremendously important decisions that we have to make in the next 2 decades to preserve our way of life and to protect the legacy of the human race. We must get off fossil fuels and transition to a 100% renewable energy economy as quickly as humanly possible. The United States of America must join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all people as a right of citizenship, not as a privilege or as a product that you purchase. We must move to Medicare for all. And we must transition away from a culture of rabid individualism and screw you, I got mine economics that undermines economic growth, undermines our ability to create jobs, and undermines the communities that we want to live in. What sets me apart from this field is my experience. I've been an organizer and an activist in this district for the last 4 years, and no one has knocked on more doors, made more phone calls, and spent more time talking to the voters of this district than I have. That means I know this district, whether Democrat, Republican, Independent, Conservative, working families, or what have you. I've spent time talking to these people, listening to their needs, and I understand how to represent them in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
My name is Dylan Radigan. I'm from Saranac Lake, born and raised in Saranac Lake, and running for Congress, or running as an option to represent our district in Congress as a member of the Democratic Party. My story is fairly simple. When I left Saranac Lake High School after graduating and went to college in Schenectady, I then spent 20 years working in New York. My political career was defined by my situation in the front row of the financial crisis, and because I was in the room as the financial crisis was developed and resolved, I had a front row seat to how broken our politics are and how our policies are made. At the same time, my mother was working up here at Essex County Mental Health. So I was not only watching all the money being sucked out of America into skyscrapers in New York and cities around the world, I was watching the consequences of that create a situation where 3 out of 5 people in our district are at or below the poverty line. Over the past 10 years, I spent my time devoted to both economic and political policy reform. Started to get money out of politics in 2011. Changed the ballot measure in Maine, or worked to change the ballot measure in Maine in 2016. I'm in a situation where I'd like to take that voice to Congress, which is a place where obviously they know me from my past 10 years.
Thank you.
I'm Katie Wilson, and I was born here in the North Country, but I returned here after a couple years out in Colorado, where I had my beautiful son, who's here in the front row, And I was pregnant with my beautiful daughter who's right next to him. And I came back not because I wanted to at the time, but because the economy crashed. And my partner and I and our children were essentially forced to return home where we knew we'd have a soft landing. And I remember that first time that spring rolled around after we returned, and the way the incredible natural beauty of this area struck me for the first time. That green, that electric green that we see right now, that almost temperate rainforest type of green. And I quickly also remembered how hard life can be here, and how people struggle and hustle to make ends meet and work multiple jobs, and what that's like. But I also saw and remembered really quickly how the communities come together to help people out. And right now, we need a little bit more of that in Washington, D.C. Right now, our congressional representatives are all worth about $1 million or more, tied really closely to Wall Street and all the lobbyists. And that's what needs to change, and that's what I'm here to fight for.
Thank you.
Now we will move on to our first section of questions, which is education. For this section, each question you will have 30 seconds to answer. Our first question goes to Don, which is, do you believe education is a fundamental right? Why or why not?
It's absolutely a fundamental right. Education really is the great equalizer in life. When you think about what really uplifts people, especially people maybe if they're not as economically advantaged, it's having access to a good quality education. That's what really uplifted, not my grandfather who never had the opportunity to get an education, but his kids who had good access to a good quality public education in New York State. So yes, it's a fundamental right. It's the great equalizer. Thank you.
I believe education from pre-K through public university and community college is a fundamental right. My parents and their siblings spent most of their growing up years in one of New York City's orphanages. And it was the public school in New York that was, I like that phrase, the great equalizer. It saved my life. And I profoundly support public education, not for-profit education. And the one thing I want to add to this, I'll add later. I see that red card.
It is a fundamental right. Education is the great equalizer, and it is the great stabilizer and the great empowerer. In school, we are supposed to learn not just how to read and write, and that is what empowers us, but we're also learning how to critically think, how to question. And without a well-educated citizenry, that is how demagogues arise. That is how fake media takes hold. And I am not making any insult towards those who voted for Trump. I am just saying education is a right.
So, of course, education is a fundamental human right. This is how we invest in the intellectual infrastructure of our country. Think internationally for a second. The country of Denmark rewards their higher education students with a stipend when they go to school. Here in the United States, we punish our students with student debt. So if you play these two models out for a couple of decades, which one is going to have the more competitive workforce? The one that creates an incentive for people to become more educated and more productive citizens, not the country that punishes the aspirations of its young people.
I have yet to find somebody who doesn't think education is a fundamental human right. The reason we do not have the educational dialogue that we deserve in this country is because the government is controlled away from the interests of teachers and students and in the interest of everybody from Pearson to the standardized testing companies. The reason that exists is because teachers and students don't have money to pay for politicians, and Pearson and standardized testing companies do. As we reform our politics, it'll become quite easy to get the 80% of us that agree that education is a right or 90% to do it. So.
There's going to be a lot of agreement on this stage tonight, I have a feeling.
No, I know you don't think education is a fundamental. Controversial position.
He's just trying to eat up my time. No, I do agree it's a fundamental right, and why is because it allows us agency. It allows us to fully grasp our liberty And ultimately, it's what provides for a functioning democracy, because we need an educated electorate.
To start with Dr. Khan. Governor Cuomo recently implemented the Excelsior Scholarship to enable students of lower socioeconomic status to have the ability to access to a degree of higher education. What is your stance on creating a similar program on the federal level?
So there are some terrific free college programs in a bunch of states around the country, including Tennessee and Michigan. I'm a pragmatist and a realist. Creating this at the federal level, is it a good idea? Yes. What I wanted to add before is there's $1 trillion of waste in our federal government, including 22% of all programs that have no results. So should we do this? Yes. Is there money around to do this? Yes. Is it going to be possible in this administration? No. And even if, I'll finish my sentence.
When the blue wave takes over, it will be possible. And I do think it is a good idea that whatever, in which state there is the programs that afford the most access to education should be replicated throughout the states, so that we avoid a race to the bottom if people think of it in terms of taxes, but also because we are only as strong as the sum of our parts. So I think that we look at some of the states that don't have as good of an education or opportunity for higher education. We should absolutely explore this idea.
So I was a legislative staffer in the New York State Assembly during the budget season when the Excelsior Scholarship was passed. And as aspirational as that program was, it came at the cost of other educational priorities in the state of New York at a time when we still have not fully funded the public schools of New York. And it's also inefficient due to means testing. A lot of people understand that $125,000 a year in Plattsburgh and $125,000 a year in Westchester are two very different incomes. So with those caveats, yes, we should extend tuition-free higher education to all Americans, regardless of income.
So public education, state colleges should be free. In my opinion, it's why they exist. Aspirations like these scholarships, I think, are lovely, but surely there are many things about them that could be significantly improved. Total access to public education at every level, including the college level, seems to make the most sense to me. Selective benefits of any kind, to Patrick's point, tend to create acrimony and ultimately larger social costs, so universally allowing those benefits is just logical.
Again, a lot of agreement. However, I think at the root of this problem is that we have a for-profit education system, and until we address that, we're not going to get anywhere, because even with the Excelsior Scholarship Program up here, there's still room and board and meals to pay for, books. I mean, there's still incredible expenses, and so kids who are qualifying for that are still really not able to afford an education. So it's really not working across the board, and when we look at federal programs, what we really need to address is that for-profit system. We need to make it as affordable as possible for as many people as possible to get an education.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I'm the one with the student loans here. No, I graduated school with $230,000 in student loans. One of my friends, a team members that was driving up with me is helping on the campaign, not making very much at all, $90,000 just coming out of a SUNY program. That is unacceptable. This is the next crisis, the next bubble, just like the housing bubble. And if we don't get on top of it, both with respect to students that have debt already and students that are going to be coming into school, we got to get tuition under control, we got to get the debt under control. It's a crisis. Thank you.
So we're going to change our rules a little bit and get rid of these lightning round questions. So we're going to give you a minute to respond after this point to every question.
Our next question, we will start with Emily, and it is, how do you believe we can create federal programs that create equal access to quality education despite different funding values based on location?
I'm assuming that we're talking about the elementary and secondary public education programs, considering that funding for those are based on our property tax values, which we know in an area like ours that they're being depressed. And yet We have, as families leave, just as many lights to keep on, just as many square feet to heat in the winter. And so it is more difficult for areas like ours to maintain that level of education that our excellent teachers have been able to give. So we do need to figure out a way to redistribute funds so that schools like ours in rural, low-income areas can be served. And I'm open to ideas of looking at the federal level to do so.
So it's the phenomenon we've noticed that the communities with the nicest houses tend to have the best schools. And this comes back to the fact that fundamentally we fund education in most of the states through property tax. And this has led to New York having the most segregated school system in the entire country as a legacy of redlining and racial animus. So what we need to do is we need to stop funding public schools through property taxes. Now, that decision is largely made at the state level and not the federal level. But under South Dakota v. Dole, it is totally permissible for the federal government through either incentives, either giving of money, or through denying partial funding to states that don't comport with what federal policy should be, to provide incentives to the states to adopt an educational funding model that's not based on property taxes and ensures that every student gets an equal dollar amount towards their education so that we can end the disparity in states like New York with some of the best public schools in the country and some of the most underfunded public schools in the country and deal with the legacy of racism here in the state of New York.
The irony of the system that Patrick just described is it creates a phenomenon called reverse hotspotting, where basically the people that need the resources the most are the ones that are the most deprived of the resource. We have literally structurally set up our educational system to ensure that whoever needs the most education resources receives the least access to it, and whoever least needs additional educational resources gets the most access to it. When the problem is so clearly and easily defined, it is also easily resolved. There are 1,000 ways to do that, whether it's, again, completely eliminating the property tax or we're doing some sort of a rebalancing. The issue is further compounded by the movement of budgets for education to the state and federal level, which then leaves that much more leverage, less leverage, I say, for local control. But anyway, the problem is we spend the least on the schools that need the most, we spend the most on the schools that need the least. That's something that's easily fixed. It's also easily understood. It's simply a matter of having the leadership and influence in government to do it.
In an effort not to just reiterate things everyone else is saying, I think I'll tackle colleges and universities again. You know, when we're talking about a federal fix for some of this essentially education profiteering that's happening, what if we were able to perhaps regulate or place restrictions on federal monies going to colleges and universities based on their actual investment in students? Because right now tuition keeps going up and the actual money spent per child and student is going down. So if we're going to get to the root of this problem, we have to make sure that, you know, we can have a for-profit model. You know, Harvard, I mean, whatever school wants to run a for-profit model, it's free to do that, but not on the public's dime. So in our public schools and universities, we have to figure out how to rein in this administrative, you know, these exploding administrative costs and the incredible amounts of money that are getting spent on gymnasiums and, I mean, you get the point.
Yeah, I'm going to segue off of what Katie said with post-secondary education, because one of the biggest issues I see is we got to make it more affordable to have access to education in rural areas. What about rural America? I have so many friends from upstate New York that after they finished school, they just had to leave. The cost of tuition, they're buried in debt, and they're trying to figure out a way to stay here. It's a little tangential to the question, but we need to create incentives for people living in rural areas to afford their education. And better yet, to keep them here after they graduate, because we have droves and droves of young people leaving. So they have incentives for all sorts of things. Not enough incentives for people living in rural parts of the country, and I'd like to see more of that with respect to education and loans. Thank you.
I want to say some more about how you actually find the money to fund all these good ideas. Every government agency is organized the same way. There's a purpose statement or a mission, there are goals, there are programs to support those goals, there are offices that implement those programs that are staffed and budgeted, and then there are performance measures that determine whether or not those programs have actually delivered what they said they were going to deliver. We're all running for Congress, which is a legislative branch, and we still need to understand how broken the department and agency budgeting process is. There's $25 billion worth of programs in the U.S. Department of Education that does not deliver results. No results, non-performing. You could say the same thing about just about every, just 3 minutes, every department and agency. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, whatever congressional committee we want to be on, to demand accountability from the U.S. federal government and move that excess money out.
Thank you. So our next question goes to Mr. Nelson. Not all individuals choose to enroll at a college or university to obtain an associate's or bachelor's degree. Would you support programs for individuals interested in gaining an alternative to higher education? And if so, what programs would you like to see implemented?
So I'm going to take issue with the wording of the question. I don't believe that not getting a 2-year or 4-year degree is an alternative to higher education. It is higher education. And one of the things we have to do is get rid of this sort of tiered view that we have, where, you know, we have up here, we have higher education, associates, bachelor's, and master's degrees, and then we have the trade schools down here. Well, there's a lot of folks going to the trade schools now that are making more money than the people that are going to so-called institutions of higher education. I think we need to have a policy that supports all of these areas of education, whether you want to become a philosopher or a welder. And that means we need to support apprenticeship programs to allow people to learn from experienced professionals in these areas, and to support trade schools and other areas of job training and professional development to fill all the job requirements that our areas need. One of the biggest problems small businesses have in the 21st Congressional District right now is there is a mismatch to skills and available job openings, and we need to work at the federal level to ensure that we are preparing people for the jobs that are available. Thank you.
Yes, I support all forms of education, whatever you want to call it. We're in a situation right now where the world is shifting faster than it ever has, and the opportunity to adapt our entire infrastructure to move to a 100% renewable power grid, for instance, to shift completely to a much more broad distributed farming network. There are so many things that are obvious at this point that are ready to be done. Not only do I believe in it, but I invested much of the past 5 years of my life in creating environments in schools that teach people how to run solar power systems, how to run hydroponic growing systems, how to install small farming systems. Because not only do I believe that type of education is central, but because I believe that teaching people to do those things and having people do those things is also central to our overall vitality as a planet as we move off of fossil fuels and into a much more broadly distributed set of both power systems, food systems, communication systems, and water systems, and any education of any kind that helps make that transition is good for us.
I've made this a real tenet of my campaign. We need skills training more now than ever, vocational training, apprenticeships, mentorships. I think it's also incredibly empowering for community when, especially in an aging population, we have people with so many skills and gifts to offer, and young people who are hungry to receive those. This is how we start to work together and create healthy communities in yet another way. So what we must do is prepare our workforce for the incredible amount of work we have in front of us. It's the clean energy economy. I mean, it's the wind turbine technicians that have been trained at Clinton Community. It's the fastest growing sector in the country. It's 146,000 jobs have been created recently just in wind. So, you know, if we had offshore wind, we could power the entire eastern seaboard and then some. And so we need to be looking, I mean, it's market driven, and we need to be a little bit more savvy and stop having a one-size-fits-all model of what success and a real education means.
I'm going to go back to me and my friends with the student debt, because I'll tell you what, I also have a few friends that are buried in student debt, and after they went to a 4-year school and got all that debt and then couldn't find a job, they went into a trade. And they said, geez, why didn't I do this before without incurring all of that silly debt that I can't get out of? You know why? Because we're not pushing vocational training. The resources aren't there. They didn't know that the opportunity was available. I was just talking to students at Glens Falls High yesterday, and we were talking a lot about this, and it was brand new news to a lot of their ears. So we're not doing a good job making sure that young people know that these opportunities are available. And that is not only a good way to get a good job with benefits, it's a good way to avoid going into debt. Thank you.
I want to expand on something that Don just said. There's no integrity in government at the federal level. There is no honest information about the kinds of jobs that are available, the kinds of jobs that are becoming fewer and fewer. As Katie was saying, there's the solar and wind turbine technical support jobs are the fastest growing jobs in America, but you wouldn't know it from listening to what the U.S. Department of Labor says or what the U.S. Department of Commerce is investing in. So we all need to demand more honesty from our federal departments and agencies about what kinds of jobs are available as I'm the Green Party candidate, as our economy and our energy systems transitions from fossil fuels to clean energy. And the last thing I want to add, oh, it's only yellow. I think education is lifelong. I mean, there ought to be opportunities from preschool through senior citizen years to study what you want and learn the skills you want.
I believe that there is a place of higher education for every person, and that it's important for every person to figure out which place is best for him or her. And the Excelsior program is a great start for those who thrive in the public 4-year institution. I think we also need to make sure that the private 4-year institution is also accessible, because that is the best place for some people to learn. We also need to figure out how to, as others have referenced, the trades and the skills. And BOCES does an amazing job in our state. And they are working hard to extend that into the community colleges. What more can be done with that? A whole lot more, I do believe. And finally, let us not forget unions. Let us not forget that unions such as the IBEW have been having apprenticeships for years, and they continue to have them, that can get good paying jobs with good retirement benefits.
Thank you. So as we sort of end this piece, we're actually going to do an audience question. So the question is, do you support the cuts that continuously New York State tries to do for EOP programs? And I don't know if folks are aware of EOP, the Educational Opportunity Programs. It seems like New York State is always sort of trying to make cuts, and then our students have to go and lobby and try to make sure those cuts don't happen. So this question actually starts with Mr. Radigan.
So yes, I'm in favor of eliminating as much funding as possible for education. I mean, we're not getting anything for it anyway, so we might as well just stop. You know, what are we doing? It's fairly obvious that having more, I've yet to meet a politician or a political aspirant who's not in favor of more money for education. I believe the reason it's a battle at all is self-evident, which is that the political influence of the academics and students is less than the political influence of drug executives or bankers or whoever it may be, and as a result there's always a battle around that type of money. Our greatest opportunity to stop having these silly arguments about whether we should have money for education is to increase the degree of political influence that we collectively exert in order to eliminate the existence of a conversation that would be so as insulting as to suggest that we shouldn't pay for education.
Fully disagree, but what this makes me think of is a larger conversation about our society and how we claim to be this very Christian, family-centric society in which we value motherhood and children and childhood, and we have all these great values, but put your money where your mouth is. We're not funding education, we're not taking care of the poor, we're not creating an environment in which families can thrive. So this is just part of a much larger issue and kind of disease that we start really funding some of these programs and reorganizing the structure of resources and access to money in our society and in our country. We're not going to solve any of this. When we stop giving tax breaks to the wealthy, when we stop throwing money away at big business who doesn't need any more of it, then maybe we can invest in children. Then maybe we can invest in education and start taking care of people.
I absolutely agree with what everyone has said, and just to make, we're all on the same page. We're talking about some state level things. We're running for a federal office, but whenever state issues come up, this chip on my shoulder just seems to get bigger with how much upstate New York and the North Country get left behind, especially down in Albany and definitely down in DC. I remember when I was working for a New York congressman and the New York delegation would meet as a whole, all the New York members kind of come together, and the upstate members never got as loud of a voice as the others. It was downstate dominant. It drives me nuts. And I know the same thing happens in Albany, and I'm glad that students step up and they lobby, and our folks in education step up and lobby on behalf of public education, but it's a much bigger issue. I'm so sick of seeing our part of the state left behind. We deserve a louder voice. That's just a thought. Thank you.
Well, I agree it's a huge issue and bigger than education, but I wanted to just go back to where's the waste in government. So I've talked about there's over $200 billion of waste from programs that have no results. There's almost $100 billion of waste in duplicative programs. For example, the Department of Homeland Security had 50 different contractors working on programs and contracts to find one chemical, how they could detect one chemical in airports. Waste. Why do we need 50 different contractors from 50 different programs? So as students are demanding more state level funding, I think we all need to demand more accountability from the federal government. And that's where the money is. It's in lack of accountability, it's in duplication, it's in a unbelievably and obscene Department of Defense war profiting budget. It's all over, and that is part of why I decided to run for Congress.
This may be a state-based question, but it is all connected, and I think we at the federal level need to understand and think of ourselves as a partner with our state representatives, our county representatives, and our local government representatives, because when money comes into the federal government, there are choices to be made. And if the money is used to subsidize the dirty energy infrastructure, well, it's not there for the clean energy infrastructure, or, well, things like education, or things like Medicaid. And with fewer dollars threatening to come to New York State and any other state for Medicaid, that's going to put us into a really big bind, and the local government and the county governments in particular are going to be particularly strapped. And so I do see these things very much connected, and unless we have people in Washington saying, hey, if you put this money there, it's not going to be coming to my state for some very important projects.
I just wanted to take the moment to out myself as one of Don's friends that's suffering with massive amounts of student loan debt. No, on the issue of the EOP program, when I was working in the Assembly, I was involved in one of the meetings where we got lobbied on that very important program. So of course, we should preserve that program, we should expand that program. But let's talk about the philosophy of how we should go about administering these programs. We have this legacy of nibbling around the edges of big problems, and we create this little problem to solve that, or this little program to solve that program to solve that problem. It's harder to say than you think. And then you create this one over here, and you create that one over there, and so we wind up administering each of these with a taxpayer-funded public servant, when what we should be doing is guaranteeing to every New Yorker that you have a right to higher education regardless of your income. That way we have one program administered with one test, Are you a citizen? Yes, you have a right to higher education. Period. One test, one program, rather than nibbling around the edges.
We now move on to our discussion of the economy and revitalizing the North Country. Our first question is, what policy-based plans would you implement in order to combat the loss and depreciation of small businesses and economic development in rural America, specifically in the North Country? I'm going to start with Katie.
Thank you. This is really important right now. So it's a fair tax code, it's workforce development, it is childcare, affordable childcare, and transportation. This is how we start to revitalize our economy up here. First of all, a fair and graduated tax code that takes into account size and scale, so that small businesses like mine or many others in town are not held to the same standards as Walmart. Making sure that we have workforce development and vocational training, both of which are going to train people for jobs that actually already exist here and keep people in our communities, because right now we're bleeding our youth out into the cities because we don't have basic community infrastructure and we don't have skilled people to fill jobs like EMS services, nursing, farming. I mean, these jobs exist already. We don't have to recreate the wheel. Investing in the clean energy economy is huge, but in terms of right here in, say, a city like Plattsburgh, we need to make sure people aren't working just to pay for childcare, because the cost of childcare rivals rent. I could go on.
This is really the most fundamental issue that's been plaguing our region for a long, long time. And it's going to be a long road to get back, and I'm committed to changing that path. And most fundamentally, I think that without roads, without sewers, without clean water, without broadband, we just can't compete, and we have been left behind in a big way. Our counties are cash-strapped, our towns are cash-strapped. It's time for the federal government to do a real infrastructure bill that's bringing money back, straight federal money, to the North Country. And that's why I think we need a member of Congress that is sitting on the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. That's the best way you're going to get federal funds up here. That is going to spark job growth, and that's really what we need. And I think the second part, actually there's two more parts I'd like to highlight briefly. We need to keep people here, and that goes to a lot of the student loan issues that we're talking about. We need to keep those bright young minds here so they can be the next leaders in the business community and civic engagement. That's an important part. And lastly, access to capital. We've done a lot of things that have been detrimental to our small community lenders, but we can change all these things come November. Thank you.
I think the specific, discrete policies that might make a difference are absolutely cutting taxes, including business taxes, regulatory reform. Did you actually read the package that went with your student loan, and how long did it take? Can you imagine starting a business when you have to go through that kind of regulatory gobbledygook? Regulatory reform, and as I travel around District 21, I was an independent candidate for president in 2016. I was 20 months on the road, 70,000 miles around the country, and many thousands of miles around District 21. We needed 29 presidential electors, 17 of mine came from District 21. The business owners that I've talked to in District 21 do not feel like they are part of the conversation. So part of what has to happen is, however it is that we define what a vibrant economy looks like in District 21, we need to bring everybody to the table.
Working to help small businesses begin and expand is my current and relevant recent experience. It comes down to, in part, the basic funding. And that means funding to help small businesses or entrepreneurial-minded individuals to turn their hobby into a reality. And that takes skills and that takes knowledge, such as how to brand, how do I work with wholesalers? These are not skills you can just learn off the internet. And so a lot of funding comes to our Small Business Administration to help learn those sorts of skills, so that when someone walks in the door, they can be taken from soup to nuts to turn this vision into a reality. And so we need to make sure that Ag and Markets continues to get funded, because that's where a lot of the money comes from. And also, how about business continuation? There is a laundromat in Saranac Lake. He wants to desperately sell, but he can't find anyone to do it. How can we help small business-minded people in our area be able to continue, be able to continue those businesses?
The single greatest thing we can do for economic development in the North Country and in the United States is move to a Medicare for all healthcare system. This deals with job lock, where people are currently working in jobs that maybe they don't want to and can't leave because they're attached to their health care. But it's also how we free up the resources to our cash-strapped municipalities. In New York State, 50% of Medicaid is paid for at the county level. Now, talking with local elected officials in upstate New York and the North Country, upwards of 80% of our highest in the nation property taxes are going to Medicaid and other health care. If we move to a national Medicare for all system, we will be freeing up 80% of your property taxes in your communities to work on roads and bridges, to build sewer systems. We've got plenty of communities that lack sewer systems, and that is holding back business development, to do rural and municipal broadband. So if we can free up those resources, we can have a lot of investment that will drive business development here, and it will also free up entrepreneurs to pursue their goals without fear of a medical bankruptcy.
Perhaps nothing's more frustrating than this issue, although I guess it depends. Every issue can frustrate you to no end if you decide to think about it for too long. My experience for years going back and forth with the sitting members of our Congress, our Senate, our Cabinet, and all the rest of it for, again, a good portion of a decade of my life revealed to me that these aren't issues that they care about because they don't see these issues as relevant to getting campaign donations or retaining their job. The solutions are evident and obvious. Patrick is completely correct. We already have national health care. We just apply it selectively. It's not a new thing. We could easily have an infrastructure bank. Patrick didn't mention this. I don't know why. I expected more from you on the infrastructure. You're great on healthcare. In addition to Patrick's brilliance on healthcare, next time hopefully he'll bring up the National Infrastructure Bank, which I've been pushing for since 2011, which would provide a foundation to finance all the many ideas that are possible, along with obviously the tax code.
You get something like that?
Thank you. So our next question. There is a large percentage of North Country households and businesses who don't necessarily have reliable access to internet services such as broadband. What actions would you take to ensure that citizens of District 21 have more reliable access to internet communication services? I'm going to start with Mr. Boyden.
This is just like what I said before. We need a member of Congress that's infrastructure focused. This is a great example of the state stepping up. They just stepped up. $500 million coming to our part of the state, but the federal government is doing nothing. If we had a member of Congress sitting on the committee that was focused on infrastructure issues, that was finding ways to get federal funds, whether through grant or otherwise, up to this part of the state, that's going to get us broadband. That's going to allow us to compete in the 21st century of Congress. 21st century economy, and that's why we need an infrastructure-focused member of Congress. Thank you.
Well, count me as one of those North Country households and small business owners with unreliable internet access. I had a friend come and stay with me for 6 days, and 5 days into the beginning of my data package, my internet data was all over. So 2 of us used up 5 out of 30 days of internet data in ways that would never happen in the bigger cities. I think we have to be realistic about what the federal government is going to do before 2020, because and I assume that Democrats and independents and Greens and Libertarians and third-party candidates will prevent the Republicans from having a majority in Congress. That's still not a 60-person majority, thank you, to prevent filibusters. So these kinds of wonderful, visionary, can't we solve these problems now, isn't going to happen until the White House changes.
This question always always makes me think of one of the worst votes, and she's taken a lot of bad votes that the incumbent has made, and that is on the health care. And the reason I think of it is because during the first, 5 months of 2017, she spent her time and energy pushing a bill that would repeal health care from tens of thousands of people in the North Country. Why didn't they talk about an infrastructure bill? That is what we need. That is what would have benefited her constituents. And I think that is something that we will hang around her neck until she is out of office on November 7th.
So yes, progress is being made about rural broadband. But we need to take it a step further and reverse a trend we've seen in rural economies before, where last generation's infrastructure comes to us as next generation's infrastructure is going to urban communities. We need next generation's internet infrastructure coming to rural America before it hits the cities, so that we can attract people by having an infrastructure advantage to help develop our economy. And I intend to build a coalition in Congress about this, because this is one of the things that we can do, partnering with urban representatives to decrease housing pressure in areas like New York City, where the rent is indeed too damn high. So that's one of the things that we need to do. And we shouldn't do it through public-private partnerships or providing incentives to companies like Verizon and AT&T. We should do it by supporting municipal broadband at the local level and help communities develop their own internet that they own and they control, rather than being controlled by the big players. And I feel like I should mention this. Green Party candidates are not going to help us take back the House of Representatives. Green Party candidates are helping protect Republican majorities.
Thank you. What's the question? Okay, this fact about the Green Party, you got a little heated. That wasn't the question. What was your thought? Okay, so those are the questions, the Green Party, or the question is broadband?
If you don't mind speaking.
Oh, let me see.
Was it my answer?
Yeah, please. We might be. You never know. Our hair's converging. I'm more gray. So broadband, we all know we need broadband. We all know that policy can help make it happen. We all know the policy can hinder it from happening. We all know that ultimately we need a representative who has the presence and knowledge in our legislative government, in our government on a federal level, to be heard and have an influence. I believe that my decade of doing that makes me a uniquely known and not necessarily well-liked person in Washington, D.C., but I'm certainly somebody everybody knows who I am, and so they certainly be aware of the first day that I arrived. And these are the sorts of things, obviously, we would be fighting for. Specifically, what would I do? I recently met with a board member of Loon, which is a division of Google. Loon is in the business of putting balloons up to ensure broadband access globally. They primarily work overseas. I asked whether they would consider upstate New York overseas.
I like you, Dylan. The truth is, though, as a freshman in Congress, you are kind of boxed in no matter who you are, even if you are famous. However, we've been having this broadband conversation for over a decade now. It's the most frustrating thing for me personally. I've been on, part of a family business that would have gone under if some very philanthropic fine men in Keene hadn't invested a bunch of their own money. And so, yeah, we've made some progress, but here's the problem. The ROI on covering upstate New York just isn't there. And instead of incentivizing companies and saying, please, please, please come cover us, it's time to put our foot down and say, listen, you're gonna be penalized if you don't. This is big money screwing over the little guy, yet again. And we have to understand the problem through that lens if we're gonna get anything done. So that's my solution. We take things away if they don't come and take care of us. It has to be last mile, and I think it should be union.
Thank you.
We now move on to our next question. If elected, you will have the responsibility to make decisions that not only impact the North Country, but also the United States as a whole. How would you plan to balance the interests of the North Country with those of our nation? And we're going to start with Ms. Khan.
It's already happening that the federal government and our current elected House of Representatives member are making decisions that are horribly affecting the North Country and the nation as a whole. I think that we need a powerful voice in Washington that is not bought and paid for by big donors, that can stand up to the invested interests, and that includes demanding that we do something about our war budget. There's $700 billion going towards America starting and maintaining aggressive wars around the country. Wars for empire, wars for land, wars for oil, and lying about the consequences in the Mideast, including millions and millions of dead civilians here, and that's why the Republicans keep winning. The biggest voting bloc in the state of New York did not vote. So I'm not taking votes from the Democrats, I'm taking them from Democrats and Republicans.
I will use a little of my time to say this. Mr. Radigan, you may have spent decades debating, but what really matters is what solutions have you brought to the North Country. That is what this race is about, and that is what matters. As far as this question, there are many other rural communities in our nation that are just as underserved as we are. And so I think that a lot of what we do to serve our nation will serve a lot of underserved regions around the country. And that in Congress, I will build coalitions and seek those people who we need partnerships with. That said, there are a lot of urban areas. There are a lot of areas with people who don't look like us, communities of color. And we absolutely also, and I look forward to building partnerships with the representatives in those areas so that we can make sure that when we're solving a problem here, we're not creating a problem there.
The federal government should not engage in zero-sum transactions. That's where some areas benefit and other areas suffer. We should only act on policies that are win-win, non-zero-sum. Everybody benefits. So why then does the incumbent consistently vote against this district? Well, that's because over her career she has taken more than $1.7 million from corporate political action committees. And in this cycle, she has taken more money from corporate PACs than she has taken from individuals. Her small dollar donor percentage is under 5%. Most of that money does not come from this district, so she is not working for this district. So one of the things we need to do to ensure that we have representatives actually working for their constituents is we need to move to publicly funded elections, and we need to elect candidates that don't take money from these corporate political action committees that try to buy our representatives for their purposes rather than what we elected them to do, which is going to work for us.
The interests of the North Country are the interests of the United States. The interests of the United States are the interests of the North Country. It is to the North Country's benefit massively to take a leadership position in this country on political reform, which is the first step to resolving every single issue that we're discussing. It's in the interest of the North Country and America to have a more prosperous rural life, whether it's here or anywhere else in the world. There is no situation where the interests of the North Country and the United States are misaligned. A healthy North Country is a healthy United States of America, and I do beg to differ with my esteemed colleague Emily Martz. My Uncle Bert sold Studebakers here in Plattsburgh, and I believe that was a meaningful contribution to the district, if only it was Ford F-150s.
That was your uncle or you? Now.
Rural America's in trouble right now, and you know, this isn't the only part of America that's rural. There's, you know, think about all the people in the Rust Belt, you know, the whole flyover country phenomenon, and how resources keep getting funneled to urban areas. You know, a lot of investment capital is kept in California and New York, and you know, that's starting to shift, but what that's created, you know, again, like, we're all arguing over access to resources and how people make money. We all agree that money in politics needs to be fixed, but we need to understand also what's causing the intense polarization in our country right now. And a lot of that is, you know, the us versus them. And it's happening in rural and urban America too, and it's fueling social issues. It's people fearing that they won't have enough to survive. So if we're going to tackle these larger social justice issues, we have to take care of people's basic needs, and that's really what this moment needs to be about.
Thank you.
The fact that this question has to be asked is, in my eyes, a reflection of just how broken our democracy really has become and currently is. We're all applying for a job right now. That's to be a member of the United States House of Representatives. We are applying to be the representative for New York's 21st Congressional District. Your job is to vote for the district. End of story. And I agree with what most of everyone said. What's good for this district is good for most of the country, communities that have been left behind. One thing that I'd like to do, if I'm so fortunate to get the job, is to form a caucus of all rural Northeast communities. We need all the members from the rural Northeast regions working together, pushing the same legislative agenda, and that's what I'd like to do. Thank you.
You won't believe, but I like this guy so far.
So we're going to do an audience question. So I do move we're starting with Mrs. Marks. So Ms. Marks, do you support a single-payer health care system, yes or no, and why?
I do. I absolutely do, for a variety of reasons. And I'll tell it with a story. And it's the story of two Americas. My uncle developed melanoma and it metastasized to his lungs. And fortunately, with his retirement, his insurance was able to cover most of the bills. And he's in remission, and he didn't have to devastate his family. And then you have my good friend's late husband, who lost his job. And he was starting to show signs of a heart attack, and they couldn't afford health insurance. And my friend kept pushing him to go to the doctor. And out of pride, he wouldn't go. He didn't want to saddle his family with what he knew was going to be great debt. And finally, she convinced him to go, and at the intake window, he dropped dead of the heart attack. We are the richest country in the world. There is no reason that should happen.
Yes, of course, absolutely. That's why I'm committed to co-sponsoring HR 676 in the House that's approved and expanded Medicare for All, and introducing the Senate, or a House version of S1804. This is the Medicare for All bill in the Senate. Let's pull the best parts of those two bills together and pass it. I believe in single payer. I used to be a person that said universal health care by any solution. But I believe now in single payer because I think there's something in the American psyche that is resistant to mandates saying you must buy health insurance. And I think the American people are much more receptive to you're an American citizen, therefore you have health insurance. And if I think we look worldwide, we see that our fellow former British colonies, Canada and Australia, have both had incredible success with a single payer system, and mandate-based systems like the Affordable Care Act have been tremendously successful in countries like Germany and France. And I think it's in the American culture that the system that will work best for us is Medicare for All, single-payer health care.
Yeah, total access for health care is something that is a delightful issue. It's one where you talk to Republicans, conservatives, you talk to really anybody. They may take issue with the word universal, which has been politicized, but it's hard to find people who don't believe that universal access to health care is something that is obvious and necessary to take us from being basically barbaric to base civilization. So yes, I fully support it. Yes, there's 1,000 reasons for it. Yes, there's no reason not to have it. It's where we're going to end up. It's just a matter of how long it takes to get there. It's a shame on the Democratic Party that the #1 polling issue in the district and in America, but certainly in the district, is health care. They've been talking about it for decades. It's time to actually solve it and move forward. And I believe we're certainly closer than we have ever been. Remember, we already have a national health care service. We just assign it, as I mentioned, selectively to veterans or to people over 65. We already have the infrastructure.
I'd love love to just sit here and say yes and move on, but it's not that simple, right? We all want, and I agree with everyone here, it makes sense, and everyone knows, it doesn't matter what letter comes after your name, that healthcare is a necessity and we should all have access to it. But I want to talk about what we do right now, instead of just like these great big ideals. Because yeah, you know, that's what I want. However, how are we going to get there? You know, what are we going to implement? When are we going to stop just campaigning on what everyone wants to hear and talk about the steps it's going to take to achieve our goals, and how those goals aren't necessarily right around the corner, they take a little time. So that's why right now I support Chris Murphy's plan for a Medicare buy-in on the open exchange. You're not forcing anyone to do anything, you're giving them the freedom and choice to choose a Medicare plan that we know works. It's a self-promoting system, it's going to drive prices down, it's going to cover more people, and it's going to be a bridge to where we want to get to. Thank you.
And I'd like to extrapolate on some of Katie's notions there about what are we going to do to actually get there, because I think we're all in agreement that healthcare is a fundamental right. We need to, first of all, there are things you could do even in a Congress where you could get bipartisan support. We could lower the Medicare entry age in a year to 55. You get bipartisan support for that. You could allow Medicare to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies on pricing. You could probably get some bipartisan support for that. But we need to ultimately get to universal coverage. And we have to do it smart and in a way that's reflective of keeping costs down. You know, I was just talking with one of my coworkers at my job where I support myself. She was diagnosed with breast cancer this winter, and they got most of it early. And she has a type where there's some measure that shows that it might be potentially kind of aggressive. And there's a prophylactic that she could take, but because her initial cancer wasn't invasive, she's just going to have to pay for this prophylactic out of pocket. And that just tells you that the insurance companies do not have human health and interests, and that's wrong. That's why we need universal health care. Thank you.
There's two points I want to make. One, single payer is part of the Green Party platform, so of course I support that, and would, as anybody at this table, co-sponsor legislation related to single payer. I live in Spoon Lake. If I had a heart attack in my little town, the protocol is for the ambulance to drive me 95 miles south to Albany. If somehow they got permission to take me to Ticonderoga instead, I would be stabilized and medevaced to Vermont. So there is no doubt in my mind that healthcare resources are not fairly distributed in rural America, including District 21. The solutions that have been popping up in a lot of rural areas are to grow your own, to somehow create the funding and build the partnerships to fund that one or two professional registered nurses, fund doctors to come up here, pay for their medical education, and insist on a 5 or 7 or 10 year practice in this state.
Thank you.
We now move on to our next topic of discussion, which is social justice and diversity. And this is a question from an audience member. What would you do for the LGBTQ youth in the 21st District? And we're going to start with Mr. Nelson.
So I just want to respond really quick and say that S1804 deals with how we roll that out with a 4-year plan of dropping the Medicare age and creating a buy-in. So it has been thought out and there is a plan in place. In regards to LGBTQ youth in the area, we need to expand civil rights protection for all people, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation under the Civil Rights Act. We need to make it an official protected class in the Civil Rights Act and have the laws respond accordingly. That's why at the state level they need to pass gender. You should be free to live as you are made, and people should be respecting you for that. I mean, that's why I was part of the organization of the Presbyterian Church that passed marriage equality, one of the first, if not the first, mainline denominations in the United States to say that marriage is a union between two people and to ordain people of the LGBTQ community. So this has been a passion of mine for a very long time, and it's one of the reasons I got into organizing. So we need to respect and protect everyone's civil rights, and that includes the LGBTQ community.
I will be stunned and amazed if someone on this panel comes out and they say that they are not in favor of equal rights for any constituency or any group of human beings. I certainly am not going to come out and say that. The issue with arguing about the obvious imperative for equality across all identities and all affiliations is that it is actually a conversation that is cultivated as a way to distract us from dealing with the actual issues that would create both the political reform and the economy that we would want to have. It goes without saying that a vigorous defense and advancement of all equality and all equal rights is basically occurs by virtue of getting out of bed, and that more time spent arguing about that is literally a political prop to avoid dealing with other issues by trying to make it appear as if those rights are constantly in jeopardy, because they are unfortunately in jeopardy. So it's about securing those rights so that we can actually deal with some of the other things we're talking about.
So as someone who grew up in a very small town here in the North Country, I'm painfully aware of what it was like for friends of mine to live falsely, really, for many, many years, and the kind of hardship that they endured, and some suicides. I mean, I really think that right now we see that changing, but I still see it as a really big struggle in these small towns, especially in my own kid's school. And I think that requires a support system. This question was specifically about, I can pontificate about how important it is to stand up for LGBTQ rights, but what I'd like to do is try to address what we can do in our own communities, because I think that we need to bring this down under the ground a little bit and figure out how to support children so that they are not struggling through this identity, crisis too long, and we can create support systems in our schools at an early age to really start to empower people, no matter what they identify, how they identify. And I mean, that's just what comes to mind as the most effective way to really affect change.
I think that's a really good point, what Katie's saying about bringing it down to the local level. And I think we got to acknowledge the tremendous progress that we've made. And I mean, think about it, 20 years ago compared to now. We've made huge progress. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It was necessary. What really alarms me is the current administration, because they are attacking these rights in a very dangerous way. It gets down to the community level. So that's why we need members of Congress that are going to stand up to this current administration and say, this is not what our country is about. I don't stand for it. My community doesn't stand for it. Thank you.
I believe in the power of face-to-face dialogue. I've written 2 books about government reform. My first book, published before a few of you were born, published in 1988, was titled Peacemaking, a Systems Approach to Conflict Management. I believe we have to have conversations about gender identity in our local communities, in our churches, with our friends, after dinner, during lunch. There's a phrase, microaggressions, and it's true in the ways that white people talk about people of color, and it's true about the ways far too many of us talk about people with different gender identities. We need to both have the conversations, small conversations, I think, and be honest and call out that kind of behavior and language and assaults that are inappropriate. In the same way we have to be conscious about what white privilege means in our district and in this nation.
It does come even deeper than the community level, and it comes down to the individual level to continue to be aware, and I will continue to educate myself. I attended the Trans Talk 2 down in Saratoga Springs earlier this week, and I thought I was aware. I thought I was a well-educated individual. I had a lot to learn, and I learned a lot about things like the microaggressions. And I also learned from people who spoke and some of the educators that it's really important to make sure that anyone who comes into contact and works with young people in particular, that they themselves are educated. And even if they don't understand, they need to remember that it's really important that we just treat everybody with honor and respect and inclusion.
So our next question, thus far, in 2018, there have been at least 20 instances of gun-related incidents on school grounds. This being an increase from previous years, what do you do to promote gun safety while also protecting the Second Amendment rights of the American people? This one, start with Mr. Radigan.
So the Second Amendment rights are obviously have been hijacked for an agenda that it preys upon the insecurities of our society. It is obvious that there are a litany of responsible gun laws that can be implemented. It is obvious that the best opportunity for those gun laws to be implemented is provided by the students themselves. I think it's important not to get too bogged down in constitutional arguments. I mean, if you're going to get constitutional, the preamble of the Constitution guarantees us all a right to domestic tranquility. And I could argue that unregulated gun sales throughout society are a violation of my constitutional right to domestic tranquility. But I think that having those types of arguments is a bit of a waste of our time. It's obvious that it's a problem. There are obvious solutions to the problem. There's an obvious leader that has stepped up to help us solve the problem. Our job is to support them completely and bring it home.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is a moment where the conversation is being led by someone, a group of people far more important than, you know, who's in the White House or who you elect, you know, come November. Of course, that is very important. However, there's a movement happening, and it's not going to be quieted, and it's going to become a population of voters pretty soon. And I think what we really need to do is be brave enough to have the conversation, one that's rooted in a lot of emotion, namely fear of losing freedoms, fear of losing lives, and make sure that we take the time and that we face our flaws and, you know, get this kind of all out in the open right now. So, you know, there are lots of measures that we agree upon, and certainly we need to start there. And we need to let the leaders of the moment, you know, carry the torch and ultimately come together and make sure that our schools are safe and that children are safe and places of education are very safe.
Now, I'm a gun owner and a sportsman. I have been my whole life, but I just reject the notion that we need to make a choice between protecting a constitutional right and protecting our communities. The inaction of our representatives is just so courageous. And if you talk to any responsible gun owner, they agree on a very long list of reforms which we need to do. I'm very much honored to be a Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate because I've been very outspoken about the need for reform on these issues. And I'm honored to have marched with so many young people and stood in silence with students all around the district. But it's sickening to me that our legislators are so courageless to take action on something that the whole country is calling for. It's unacceptable. Thank you.
I agree when we look at the heroism of young people that are calling for changes in gun laws and the cowardice of the current folks in Congress. It's traumatizing. It's incredibly sad about where this nation is going, and we have to make better choices in who we send into politics. There are still, as a congressional representative, very specific things that can be done. We can repeal the Dickey Amendment, which is what's prohibiting research into gun violence. We can demand universal background checks. We can raise the waiting period before buying guns or weapons. We could fund the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau, which manages background checks, and now they're doing it by hand. They have no interactive virtual database. They have 500 million records on microfiche.
Thank you.
This is a case where students have lost their lives and friends have lost their friends' lives. And politicians are afraid of losing their jobs and losing their money, and that's just ridiculous. And so we need to come to the table to be able to talk about this. And when I was in on Arbor Day in West Adams Center, thank you, Adams Center this week in Jefferson County. I approached a couple of men to introduce myself. My name is Emily Mars and I'm running for Congress, and if you're a Democrat, there's a Democratic primary happening. And I suspected the next would happen. They said, I'm not a Democrat. And I said, that's fair, I'd like to earn your vote afterwards. And they said, well, what do you think about guns? Knowing who I was talking with, I said, you can keep your guns. And they said, what, you're a Democrat? And I said, I know, and I hope you'll continue to talk with me, because unless you're willing to talk with me, unless I'm willing to talk with you, we're not going to get anywhere.
Thank you.
So the question was asking for specifics, and I can't believe I'm the last person to get this question and the only one to say the following thing. I support bringing back the federal ban on assault weapons. That means if it's a semi-automatic rifle that has a detachable magazine and one or more tactical features, it's a telescoping or retractable stock, a pistol grip, or a barrel shroud, you will not be able to purchase them again in the United States. During the previous assault weapons ban, the amount of mass shootings was less than it has been since. It's sensible policy, and it's supported by almost 50% of gun owners in the state of New York. So let's have the political courage to stand with 50% of the gun owners in the state of New York and demand that we reinstate the federal assault weapons ban. Weapons of war do not belong in civilian hands, and the majority of the people in this district agree with that point, and they should have a representative that agrees with that point. Moving beyond that, yes, universal background checks, a ban on the bump stocks, repealing the Dickey Amendment so we can study this as a health issue, ensuring that domestic violence abusers can't buy guns. Okay.
We now move on to our next question. Do you support the legalization of marijuana on either the federal or state level? If it were to be legalized, would you be open to expunging past records? And we're going to start with Ms. Wilson.
I sure do. I think that it is the greatest miscarriage of justice that we have essentially locked up a race over this, and not just a race of people, but a lot of poor people too. You know, this is an issue that does touch people up here in NY-21. And could you imagine the kind of markets it would open up? Could you imagine? I mean, what's happening in Colorado right now is really interesting because the money that they're making off of the taxes from the sales of marijuana are skyrocketing, and yet more black people are actually being arrested over marijuana charges. So, you know, we have to look at this issue from so many different points of view, but in terms of legalizing it both at the state and federal level, it's time. I mean, you know, we did this with alcohol. Like, we know where we need to go. It's going to help people. It's going to create avenues of revenue that we can actually fund things like healthcare and infrastructure plans, and so I fully support it.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. I think I might have been the first candidate, at least on the stage, to say that I support full legalization of marijuana federally. We are really missing the boat in the state on this one. I mean, you really do take a look at what Colorado did on this, and they put that money, that revenue, right into education, right into good public education. We're missing out on that. And not to mention, it would be good for agriculture in our region. It would be good for our folks in ag. I just think, with respect to criminal justice, it's a huge waste of resources. Well, we're wasting all the money on that. Why aren't we using those funds to help people that are suffering through the opioid epidemic get treatment? Through law enforcement assisted diversion. We're wasting all this money on this failed war on drugs. It should be going on things that are actually helping people. And I think legalizing marijuana will bring a lot of good revenue into our region, and we'll have a lot of different types of benefits. Thank you.
I'm a child of the 60s. Need I say anything else? I support everything Don said. I want to add two things to it. One is the veterans community is phenomenally in favor of the full legalization of marijuana. Veterans that go into our incredibly dysfunctional Department of Veterans Affairs medical facilities, 100 of which are under criminal investigation, are forced to take prescriptions for opioid medication when they want, often, marijuana. Marijuana is a way to help people that are addicted to opioids transition out of that. So it's a health issue, it's a justice issue, it's an economic issue, and the 60s were a lot of fun.
I'm okay keeping this as a states' right issue, other than legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes and for recovery purposes, because that is about health care, and I believe that needs to be taken care of at the federal level. All that said, I have gone through a long thought process, talking and listening with a lot of people who are experts, and I have come to the position where I am okay with marijuana being legal for recreational purposes. I do think, however, that we absolutely must commit, when these laws are put into place, when it's legalized, we must commit to using some of the tax revenue, a good portion of it, for funding treatment and recovery programs. Just like the one that I visited this morning, CBPH Family Center, that has opened a new branch here in Plattsburgh. Those institutions are vital to our communities.
So this is oftentimes turned into a fun, ha-ha issue. We want to legalize marijuana so people can have fun and party. This is an issue of life and death in the opioid epidemic, because states with recreational legal cannabis have a lower rate of overdose, hospitalization, and opioid dependence. So every day that we go by and we do not legalize the substance, I've trained formally as a biochemist. There is no scientific reason that this plant, and it is a plant, should be outlawed federally or at the state level. And every day we wait, people are going to die. That's why I will support Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's Marijuana Justice Act that not only takes marijuana off Schedule I, where it definitely doesn't belong, also works on expunging the records of people that were wrongfully imprisoned. We got this one wrong at the federal level, so we need to have restorative justice, and actually adds an incentive or it uses funding pressure to states to also legalize, because it's bad policy at the federal level and it's bad policy at the state level, and we need to legalize it nationwide.
I mean, so the only reason at this point not to be in favor of legalizing marijuana is the evidence of some massive social destructive force that has emerged as a result of its legalization. There's absolutely no evidence of that. There are 1,000 benefits, some of which you've just heard here. The one that I would emphasize in my few seconds with you is the incredible destructive force of the incarceration of nonviolent offenders using marijuana crimes. We're bankrupting our state in order to invest in the destruction of communities. It's peak stupid. We can go the other way. It's fairly simple at this point. The roadmaps are there, and again, the expungement is as much a big part of that as is the legalization.
Thank you. So our next question. So there tends to be an argument between privatization and public, and in particular between schools and prisons. So what do you support any sort of privatization of any government-funded programs or institutions? And this will start with Mr. Boyajian.
Boyajian. It's okay. I've been dealing with that one since elementary school. Well, I'll say with respect to public education, the biggest issue facing public education in this country, the biggest single issue is Betsy DeVos. She's got to go. Because her whole scheme is a massive privatization scheme. And that's what this whole administration is all about. A big privatization. They did this tax plan so that they could line the pockets of their billionaire friends. But you know what? It's just the first step so that they can privatize Social Security. You know, that's what they're all about. Now, I do support a certain degree of private-public partnerships. That's really, really smart stuff, and it would have huge benefits for our region if we did it in the right way. But what I'm most concerned about right now is this massive privatization scheme that is currently underway in the current administration. And we need people that are going to stand up and say this is wrong, and that's what I'm going to do. Thank you.
I'm obviously against the for-profit prison system, the for-profit education system, which is blurring the constitutional distinctions between state functions, government functions, and religion. I learned to my horror about the for-profit foster care system in this country. The federal government sends $50 billion a year to states, and the states only get that money that they then distribute it to their social service agencies if they take a child away from the biological family unit. There's no money for supporting families in crisis. There's no money for giving children custody to a grandparent who's trying to help an adult child deal with an addiction problem. So for-profit foster care, for-profit prisons, for-profit education, I agree with what Don said. They're driving towards for-profit Social Security. They're driving towards for-profit veterans' health.
I'll start by finishing the last question, and that is to say I do support expunging any records. And as I'm thinking about it here, it would be a reason to settle this at the federal level. So I would like to talk more about it, think more about it, but I think I could be persuaded. As far as privatization of public education and prisons, I do not think that is a good idea. It is a very bad idea. Whenever you put profits in between education, whenever you put profits in between a fair justice system, which it's still not fair, we know, you have all sorts of problems happen. We know that private prisons are paid and they are resulting in higher rates of people of color being incarcerated with higher and harsher penalties. That is wrong. And public education is just that. And studies are also showing us that public money used for charter schools are resulting in a de facto segregation.
So privatization is a myth that's been sold to the American public under the guise of making money. Now think about it for a second. If you have a public service that's spending X dollars on something, how do you spend X dollars on it plus a 20% profit margin and then spend less money on it overall? There's no way that you can do it. And in the private prison industry, think about it this way. What incentive is there for a private prison to reduce recidivism? Every prisoner that's released and then doesn't recommit is a lost customer to that business. These are perverse incentives. And this has led to a degree of corruption in our criminal justice system where for-profit prisons have been paying kickbacks to judges to supply them with longer sentences and to defer people into detention when other deferments would have been better. This has put people in jail, and this is because of the perverse incentives of privatization. We don't need to be privatizing, we need to be publicizing. Think about healthcare. Average for-profit health insurance company, 20% overhead. Overhead on Medicare, 2%. Government can do things more efficiently than the private sector.
Another amazing example of broken politics. Only a broken political system would turn prisoners into a for-profit product. It also ties directly to the marijuana legalization question, because a great way to make product is to put people in jail for marijuana. So you keep the marijuana illegal, you create great product, the product goes up, goes to jail, everybody makes money. Only thing is, you're actually destroying hundreds, millions of lives with countless anecdotes that I won't recite to you now. You already know what they are. There is perhaps nothing more offensive than the prison system, which finances political candidates to maintain laws that keep a private prison system that then makes money, destroying a politically less powerful part of our society. Away from the prisons, and I think the prison one is probably the most sinister and destructive, but away from the prisons, privatization in general is used as a code word for cheaper. It is not necessarily cheaper. Certainly when it comes to something like education, it's a longer conversation when I don't have a red card in front of me.
I won't try to reiterate everything that's been said here, because I couldn't agree more. What I will do, though, is point out the fact that we are also, so currently, Betsy DeVos, she is clearly taking our country in the wrong direction in terms of education. I don't know anyone that supports what she's doing or thinks she's qualified. no matter what letter comes after their name. And yet, she's given a ton of money, she and her family, to Elise Stefanik. Not only that, but her brother, Eric Prince, is currently trying to privatize our military. So I'm anti-privatization, and I'd also like to point out that it doesn't end at prison systems and education. It's certainly healthcare, and it could even be our military. It's certainly healthcare, and it could even be our military. And we need to take very big strides right now to ensure that we don't go down that path. This is a critical moment. Right now, we need to be thinking about who can replace Elise Stefanik, because that vote is going to matter. We are at a turning point in this country. It's a very exciting time, and we have an opportunity to really take back the House.
We'll be moving on to our next question. In your opinion, is hate speech protected under the First Amendment? And if so, where do you draw the line between hate speech and free speech? We're going to begin with Ms. Khan.
So I believe hate speech is protected by our Constitution, but not screaming fire in a crowded theater. So inciting violence is not protected. I want to add to some of the things that folks have been saying about what's happening in our district and in our country. The divisiveness and the hatred that's being stirred up by the current administration is out of control, and I think that's why people are giving up hope. People are feeling more despair. The biggest voting bloc is not going to vote. People are, 3/4 of people in a recent survey said they have lost faith in our government. They're not going to vote. They believe it's all corrupt. And about as many said to send more women to Congress and send more women into politics. So those of you who are voting in the June Democrat primary, I hope you send your best woman forward to meet me in November.
Hate speech that incites violence is a infraction of the First Amendment. But even if it's not hate speech that incites violence, it's wrong. And we all know it's wrong. And in this country, too many people feel with this new administration that they've been given a license to say whatever they want, demean whomever they want. And we in this district have seen those incidents right here at SUNY Plattsburgh, and a judgment of our character, a judgment of who we really are as a district comes in our response to things that happen in a small part of our district and that happen in the rest of the country. Because if we're not there to support other communities outside our borders, who's going to be there to support us? We can't expect help from others if we're not willing to give it to them as well.
So I find it abhorrent, disgusting, and un-American that we have neo-Nazis marching openly in our streets, not just down south, but just recently in Albany, New York. And I wish there were a way to make that kind of activity illegal. But I have not come up or been exposed to an argument or an objective standard on hate speech that I would trust this administration to enforce. Because think about it, if we had hate speech laws on the books today, they would be interpreted and enforced by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and they would be interpreted and enforced by a president of the United States that thinks neo-Nazis are very fine people. So when you pass these laws, you need strong objection protections to ensure that it's not abused when people you don't agree with come into power. So maybe that standard exists, but I haven't found it. Right now, under Brandenburg v. Ohio, the best you can enforce against is the direct advocacy of violence or lawlessness, and until we change the Supreme Court, that's the way it's going to be.
Hate speech is not protected under the First Amendment. Anything that is a direct threat of any kind, as Patrick just referenced, is illegal. The rest of it goes to cultural. The fact that this is a point of conversation is a direct reflection of our leadership culture. This congressional election is a great opportunity to shift what that leadership culture is, which is why it's so Exciting to have not only so many people in this particular primary, but almost every primary in America, and see so many people in so many rooms like this one so early in the political season. It gives me great confidence that we're going to see a meaningful shift in the culture of leadership over the course of the next 12 months.
So I'm going to bring this down to root cause again, and I cannot say it enough that the fear of the proverbial other that fuels the kind of divisiveness and hate speech and the violence that we're seeing right now is only going to be lessened and potentially eventually solved and healed by taking care of people's basic needs. Until people are not fearing for food, clothing, shelter, clean water, clean air, access to real liberty and freedom, will they stop, and will we stop collectively pointing the finger and blaming someone else? Because that's what we do to make sense of things. That's what children do and adults do in order to create a framework under which they can understand what the heck is going on. So we have to take care of people's basic needs if we're going to start to solve these larger social justice issues.
I want to correct, or maybe perhaps clarify what Dylan said. He might have misspoken, but hate speech is constitutionally protected. That's what the First Amendment is really all about. It's not protected if it incites violence. That's what Brandenburg, the Ohio decision's about. But that's one of the first things that made our country what it is, the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. And it's a very, very slippery slope when you start compromising that. Especially think about it under this administration. So what are we really asking about here? Hateful rhetoric, all this underbelly of hate that is coming up to the surface right now. And the most important thing that I think we can do is talk. We've stopped talking to one another. We really have, and we need to confront these ugly things in our nation's past. Whether it's the fact that our country was built on the backs of slaves, or that we committed a genocide against Native Americans when we came here. We failed to confront these things, which are the root cause of the hate, but we need to protect the First Amendment. Thank you.
So we're going to move in to our final question before closing remarks. So our final question is what we like to call the pie in the sky question. If it could become reality today, what would be your dream policy or program, and only one, that would better the North Country and nation, and you can get it passed without any issue? I want to start with Ms. Martz.
Only one. And I won't choose the one we've talked a lot about, which is healthcare. I think of the North Country, and I'm in this race to create opportunities for everyone. And so I've been thinking a lot about the tax bill that was just passed, that is one of the most regressive tax bills we have ever seen in the history of our country. And it sure doesn't do much for our district, especially our small businesses. If you can give incentives to large corporations to bring back their money and only pay 8% in taxes, I think we can create incentives for small businesses to start right here. So I would like to see a tax incentive for when somebody invests in or creates a business in a rural economy, and we can get into the details as we figure out this legislation, that there is a long-term tax incentive for that, whether it's on Main Street, whether it's in solar energy, whether it's for farmers. But my pie in the sky is to create a tax incentive for investing in or creating small businesses in rural areas.
So I want to start with what's not pie in the sky. Medicare for all is not pie in the sky. Transitioning to a 100% renewable energy economy with the largest public works project in the world history is not pie in the sky. It's necessary, sensible, reasonable policy. Forgiving student debt is not pie in the sky. If we can find $1.5 trillion for unnecessary tax breaks for the wealthy and the powerful, we can find $1.5 trillion to bail out our students that are deeply in debt. So pie in the sky for me would be a magnetic levitation train system and hyperloop system uniting the Northeast and the state of New York with 200-mile-an-hour trips. You could get from Montreal to New York City in like under 2 hours, from Plattsburgh to New York in under an hour, and it would unite the region and unite the country with massive, fast, an efficient public transit powered by a renewable energy electric grid. Those are the kind of dreams that I have. Or like, let's colonize the solar system. That's pie in the sky by investing in our space program. But you know what? Those are pie in the sky ideas, but we should still do them.
We have the money right now to finance Patrick's pie-in-the-sky maglev system. Although if Patrick gets the job, I'm going to try to persuade him to skip maglev and go straight to teleportation. It's possible. So please, don't get stuck somewhere in the middle. My pie in the sky, very simply, is a national infrastructure bank. $3 to $4 trillion out of the Federal Reserve would easily capitalize such a bank, and it could support everything from the 100% renewable grid, infrastructure upgrade, on down the line. Every small business, every job you can think of, every healthcare budget, go down the line. So my pie in the sky, although I agree it's probably not that pie, certainly not as pie as maglev or teleportation, but as a national infrastructure bank. Here's what I'm going up with. We'll do it together.
So this was specifically pie in the sky, and I'm just gonna break something down here. Within the next 10 to 15 years, potentially, a third of our workforce is going to be replaced by automation and AI. That's reality. So we're gonna have to figure out really quickly, with a bunch of people out of work, how to provide food, clothing, shelter, the basic necessities for our population. So when I think about pie in the sky, and this is not something that my team wants me to say out loud right now, I'm looking at a universal basic income. So how else are we going to take care of people? And this isn't socialism. This is figuring out how the hell people are going to have access to resources without jobs. This isn't you don't have to work. This is you have something as a baseline to provide for your family so people aren't killing themselves, shooting up schools, and otherwise becoming terrorists within their own country.
I liked everyone's answers, but I gotta say, I think Patrick won this round. Pretty good. Good. No, it's really interesting because I was raised in a family under this premise. My father especially would say this. You always undersell and you over-deliver. And it's really funny to be a candidate. This whole business of being a candidate is this constant oversell and under-deliver. That's what every politician's done to us for our whole lives. But you know what? No, a lot of things really aren't pie in the sky. And I used to use that phrase a lot, but I think back about the first year when I worked in Congress. It was the first year of the Obama administration. Getting the stimulus bill done could have been pie in the sky, but we got that done. Getting the Affordable Care Act might have been pie in the sky, but we got that done. And, climate change. We almost got that done. I'd be honored to get back to Congress and finish the job for you. But it's really a testament to what we can do if we get a good Congress of good elected Democrats come this November. Or Greens. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. I appreciate the inclusion. Given the number of veterans and men and women in uniform in this district, and the fact that we are driving this nation towards more and more war, and that veterans at least are not re-upping, that we do have an issue with a for-profit military force, and so the draft is an issue that young and old have to think about again. My pie in the sky policy is a global ceasefire and a ceasefire here at home. On October 1st, 2016, I called for a U.S. ceasefire. And since I've done all that, I've done a lot of work. I have designed and facilitated a 1,000-person summit on violence in Cleveland, Ohio. I've done a lot of work in justice reform. In my call for a U.S. ceasefire, I talked about exactly what to do in our schools, in our government agencies, and in our communities with law enforcement.
Now we're going to move into closing remarks, and we're going to start with Mr. Nelson.
So Katie, thank you for starting the conversation on basic income and automation. It's incredibly important. I don't know how to fund a universal basic income, but one of the things that we can do that is practical policy would be a minimum income guarantee or a negative income tax that sets an income floor for all Americans and functionally makes poverty illegal in the United States. That's something we can do, would cost $200 to $300 billion a year, but that's half the cost of the military-industrial complex, and what's the value of eliminating poverty? My name is Patrick Nelson, and I'm here asking for your support on June 26th and in the straw poll tonight for the United States House of Representatives to represent you and your interests and not the corporations in Washington, D.C. by being a bold fighter for those of us that, everyone in this district that feels left behind by a financial establishment on Wall Street and a political establishment in Washington, D.C. that has had far too much control over our country for far too long. And in 2018, we're going to start to reverse that trend, and it starts right here in the 21st Congressional District. Thank you.
So you can see there's virtual uniformity on any policy discussion. I haven't done as many of these as everybody else has, but I imagine y'all are pretty used to it, saying the same thing, different words. Yeah. I think the question ultimately becomes less about what we believe and how we're actually going to advance getting what we want. My own experience is very specific in the study of political corruption in this country and economic corruption in this country. I've spent the past decade devoted to confronting our federal government on the issue of political and economic corruption, and I believe I present a good option to represent the district to advance political reform and economic policy reform so that so many of the conversations that we're having tonight and that we agree on can actually come to manifest as a reality.
So right now we're faced with a big choice and a few choices. And I didn't know there was a damn straw poll again. I would have tried to be funnier, or smile more, or say things that you would like instead of things that I thought were true. But that is kind of the point right now. We have a choice between the same old, which is people who tell you what you want to hear and don't really deliver, or someone who's a straight shooter and who is maybe going to tell you what you don't want to hear, but deliver as much as possible. And at the end of the day, this is about who can get elected. It's not about who wins the primary right now. I mean, it is, but it's about who can beat Stefanik. Who are a bunch of Republicans and independents in this district going to vote for? Who are they going to trust? Who is going to give them a good enough reason to not vote for Stefanik maybe a third time? And that's why I'm here asking for your vote, for your trust, and for your help in taking back this seat.
I'm not going to give you a pitch on why you should vote for me or how I'm the most qualified or anything like that. I think you have a lot of great choices on this stage today, but I just want to make an observation. If you're really actually dissatisfied with Representative Stefanik, and you should be, because she's courageless and she's complicit and she's not standing up to this administration, which is what we need right now. But if you really are dissatisfied with her, I want you to note this observation. We do a lot of these events. I see a lot of the same faces in the crowd, okay? And it's great to see some young faces. When I come to a college forum, I want to see all college kids in the forum. Next time you come to one of these, tell a few friends, make them come. Tell a young person. You want Elise Stefanik out of there? Get a bunch of young people to vote. We can do this. We got to do it together, and I'd be honored if you wanted me to be a representative. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Lynn Kahn. I'm the Green Party candidate for Congress in this district. I think the same old is electing another Republican or Democrat. 3/4 of the people in this country do not believe that the Democrats or Republicans can solve problems. I'd rather be perfecting my lamb curry and getting the garden started. I'm doing this because I understand how government works, I see the waste, I see the need, and I couldn't not do this. And I truly believe only an independent or third-party candidate can bring together Republicans and Democrats and forge solutions, create solutions to the really serious problems that are facing our country. In this district, we have so much potential, and there's so many smart people and innovative ideas, and there's so much energy out there, and it's the current government process that bangs down that energy in is why there's so much despair in our district and our country.
I am a Democrat, and I am proud to be a Democrat, because it is the Democratic Party that got this country the 40-hour work week. It is the Democratic Party that got this country Social Security and Medicare. It is the party that got us the Civil Rights Amendment. We are a party of the people, and yes, we need to get back to that. We need to do a better job telling it. But we are the party that believes that all people matter. We are the party that believes that everybody should have a chance to realize their full potential. And we are the party that believes that a 40-hour work week should be rewarded with food on the table and the ability to save for retirement. And so it is from those democratic principles that my visions come, and I told you one of them: more graduating seniors can stay here with a family-sustaining job. I do believe that if we work together, we can, in this rural district, can be a model for other rural areas that want to thrive. I'm Emily Martz, and I ask for your vote on June 26th. Thank you.
One more round of applause to our candidates up front. I'd also like us to give a round of applause for our sponsors tonight, Tau Kappa Epsilon, the Student Affairs Board, and the Student Association for putting on this event. Thank you. Thank you for all of you coming tonight. It's been a great night, so thank you, and have a good evening.
You can turn it off now. Yeah, just press the power button.